In this video, I'll demonstrate how to configure remoted hosts and clients using an XML configuration file. Up to this point in our videos, we've looked at the flexibility of remoting and the different options that we have when creating remoted components. And we've hard-coded all the connection values, the different service types, the activation modes, and so on. And as you know, this is not probably the way that you want to develop your applications. You'd have to recompile your entire application every time you wanted to move it to a different environment. .NET Remoting, however, gives us some built-in faculties to make changes almost on the fly using a configuration file within your application. So let's go ahead and get started. I resurrected an old example, the Remoting Simple solution, that had three projects. The first project was the business object, and for the purpose of this project, we're not going to touch anything inside of the business object itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this down. Then, if you recall, we had the host. So let's take a look at the host. And within the host, we hard-coded some information like the channel, and we had to go through the registering of that channel that we created, and then also we had to then specifically call the Marshall method of the remoting services class. And so there was a little bit of hard-coded information inside of that, a little bit of work for us here. Additionally, if you recall from some of the previous videos, we had to specify if we wanted it to be a singleton or not. Now, I didn't have that code in this particular example, but if we wanted it to be single call, we had to set that information in the host. Now let's take a look at the client itself, and notice that we created this constant called client URL that had a hard-coded URI that pointed to our channel and our specific application. Additionally, we had some kind of nasty work here where we actually created an instance of the customer. We had to set it equal to this remoting services.connect, get the type of the customer, pass in the client URL. So there's a little bit of messy work there. Now, obviously, as a conscientious application developer, we don't want to hard code strings within our application because these kinds of things can change. In fact, from the development environment to staging to production within your environment, you may have a completely different URL. And from a hosting perspective, you might have a need to host the application a different kind of way, and you don't want to change all the source code to make it a different well-known mode, or to change the port or any of that kind of information. So there's definitely a need for configuration. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do. We'll start with the host. I'm going to just pull the window over a little bit and right-click and select Add a New Item off to the right-hand side of the screen. And near the bottom of the list of things that you can add to your project is an application configuration file called app-config. We're just going to leave it with the default name, and I'm going to click Open. And here we get kind of a very vanilla version of a configuration file. And so we're going to have to do a lot of this work ourselves. So we're going to type in some of the constructs that the system.runtime.remoting class will look for. Within this service node of our XML file, we're going to tell it that we want it to be a well-known object and that we want it to be singleton. Now, I have intentionally lowercased the s on singleton, and I'll show you why in just a moment. And that's a bad thing, by the way, if you stop listening to this video at any point, because these are case sensitive and you might come up where you mistype something and get some strange errors. Okay, so that takes care of service, and we'll come back and explain all these in just a minute and tell you why they're pertinent. The next section we're going to have to fill in is the channels, and this will allow us to define that custom channel. We're going to use HTTP, so we can set that here. We're going to set the port here to the port that we wanted to use. And we're going to give the channel a name. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's take a look at our host application, see all the code that we can eliminate by using this remoting configuration file now. Let's go ahead and get rid of all the comments that we had. So let's take a brief overview of what we have here. We have a bunch of comments. Then we had to create and register a new TCP channel. We had to call this remoting services. We even created a new instance of the customer. We had some more comments. I'm just going to chop all this out so that all we have are two console statements, and then I'm going to chop out all these comments as well because they don't apply to this anymore. And then in its place, all I'm going to put here is remoting configuration.configure, and then we're going to pass in the name of our config file. Now, here's the tricky part. The configuration file for Windows applications as well as console applications needs to be in the bin directory, in the same directory that our actual exe assembly will be found in. However, in this case, our app.config will be in the directory above that, in the actual host directory. The host directory will have a bin directory under it. Let's take a look at Windows Explorer, and I'll show you what I mean. Here's our remoting simple, and within our host directory there's a bin folder. Host is where we have all of our source code files, and bin is where our actual host.exe will be located. And our configuration file needs to be named host.exe.config. Now here's some good news. A lot of this is taken care of for you by VisualStudio.net. So all you need to do is keep app.config in your project and then type in host.exe.config. Let's go ahead and save our project. And now we could actually run the application knowing that our host is configurable. So let's do this. You notice, remember when we talked about the app config, that we did a lowercase s. Let's see what happens now when we run our application and why that's a problem. We get this Microsoft Development Environment runtime error message that says the .config file host.exe.config cannot read successfully due to an exception. The well-known service entries must contain a mode attribute. Well, you say, I have a mode attribute. The reason that it doesn't accept the mode attribute is because of our spelling. So let's go ahead and change that. I just wanted to show you the things that can go wrong and to just read through the instructions that happen, because it's usually just a error in your typing. So let's go ahead and run it now. Okay, so if you followed along in the pre-examples, this should look pretty familiar to you. Let's go ahead and get our host up here. Notice that our host worked, and now we're working in our client. We're going to call this, we're going to type in Steve. And as you can see, it chokes. And I've taken a look at this extensively. However, I wasn't able to quite figure out. I'm just going to attribute it to the fact that there's something about the way that we are creating an instance of the customer object on the client, the C-type remoting services.connect with the client URL and everything, that's causing it problems. So I guess my suggestion to you is if you do run up against that, make sure that your client is also using an app.config file. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go ahead and right click on the client and select add new item configuration file. We'll leave an app.config there. And then let's go ahead and add in the configuration settings. And I think that's all we need. I'm going to go ahead and select Save. And then the next thing we're going to do is go back to our client code. And here we're going to cut out a bunch of stuff here. We'll just cut that out. We'll take this declaration out as well. And in its place, we'll put the remoting configuration. The name of the file again is client.exe.config, even though we added app.config to our application. And then here we're going to create an instance of that customer object. And so now let's go ahead and give it a spin. We'll select the run, and with any luck it'll work this time. Okay, seemed to work that time. Great. Now let's take a look at the items that we actually added into the app.config for the client and for the host. First of all, we'll take a look at the client. First of all, a lot of this structure is just for the purpose of the application so that the system.runtime.remoting can find things where they're looking for. So really the most important piece here is this well-known statement, which means that it is a server-activated remoted application. And if you recall, there's also client activated, in which case we would exchange this for the word activated. As for the next statement, the attribute of this node, the type equals businessobjects.customer.customerProxy, and the convention here is that this is the actual type. So we have a customer class, and so that's what makes this the name of the class or the name of the type, and this is the actual name of the assembly. So our assembly dot or our customerProxy.dll. And this could also contain additional information if this was in the global assembly cache, like versioning information, culture, public key, things like that. The next is the URL, and this is just the full URL like we used in source code to actually reach our intended host that will contain our remoted component. Let's go ahead and close that down and take a look at the information within the app config of the host. And the first thing that we look at is the service node. It contains a child node called well-known. Again, this can be either well-known or activated. If it is well-known, then it has to be, the mode has to be either singleton or it has to be single call. The type is just like what we looked at in the client. This is the type name or the class name, and this is the assembly name, so businessobject.dll. And then finally, the object URI, which is just the endpoint where the actual file name that we never see is actually sent over via HTTP. So that's not really anything that we need to concern ourselves greatly with, but it is something that is used internally. And if we needed to give this information to somebody else who was going to hit our remote component using a non.NET web service client. The next is the channels. This again defined the actual endpoint of where this remote component would be hosted, the type, either TCP or HTTP, the port number that we're going to use, and then finally display name. And this allows us to use a configuration tool that comes with the .NET framework. And we'll see how that works in just a moment. I just want to make one last point before we move on. There's a lot of settings that you can make in the config file for remoting. So you want to take a look at the help files in the online help for more information about all the configurations that you can perform on your remoted applications. Let's take a look now at that configuration tool that I was telling you about that allows you to actually change settings in the configuration files without popping open the configuration files in Visual Studio.NET. I'm actually going to shut down Visual Studio. And what we'll do now is go to our .NET Framework Configuration Wizard in the Administrative Tools. You can get to this from the Control Panel, Administrative Tools, and then .NET Configuration. And that pops open our configuration application. Here we'll first of all add some applications to configure. This is taking a look at all of the applications that reside on our hard drive. So the first thing that we'll do is add the client. I've got several different clients, so we're going to have to take a look at the location. This is the one that I need to add, so I'm going to add that here. Notice that that appears underneath of our applications node. Let me add one other one. The host.exe. Again, we'll have to pull this over. Remoting simple. Okay, now that we have those, we can expand these out, and we'll actually hit the remoting services on the client. And here we're able to make modifications to the location, the URL where it will appear. We'll also specify it's at the same spot where the type information for this class is stored. We can take a look at the channels. We don't have any channels defined here in the client, but if we take a look at the host, we can see the exposed types and the URI for that exposed type, as well as the channels. And we can make changes to any of these settings by making that change, selecting apply or the OK button. So that's another way that you can make a change within your remoted applications without having to hard code all the specifications for the connection information, the type of activation, just about anything that you can possibly want to, you can configure using the configuration files and/or this framework configuration utility. So I hope that this was an informative video. Hope you learned a lot. Thank you.